got the wonderful Gill McKay with me. Gill, would you just like to take 60 seconds to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much, Carole. Really looking forward to having a conversation with you this morning. So my name is Gill McKay. I am from My Brain International and I'm an applied neuroscience trainer. So what does that mean? Well, I help teach coaches and trainers to use the wonderful, wonderful subject of neuroscience in their work so they can get better, quicker, faster, more amplified results with their clients, greater transformations with their clients. So I'm all about the brain. I'm all about helping us to make friends with my brain. I think that's going to become my new strap line. So we can all make friends with our brain so that we can get better results, live better lives, and understand more about human behaviour. So
that's great. Thank you, Gill. So I've asked Gill here today because I want us to talk about Neuroselling. And as Gill told us, she's an expert in neuroscience. So let's kick this off. So Gill, can you, just for our listeners, because we are live streaming across several platforms today, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook. So can you explain about the 3 different parts of the brain and the part they play in selling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go with kind of an old system because I think it's the simplest way to describe it. And sometimes if I'm running a workshop, I'll get people in the room to use their arms and their hands to understand this. So this part of the brain, the forearm of the brain, is the reptilian system. So as the name implies, we share this with scary reptiles, so cobras and anacondas, etc. And what happens with them is their brain stops largely developing them, but ours, of course, continues. This is like evolutionary development. That part of the brain for us is really about our automatic functions, the stuff that we really don't think about, like oxygen level, blood pressure, etc. Not sure we can consciously do much about that bit in the selling. This is where it starts to get interesting. So through evolution, and we still share this, we've got this part of the brain, the middle part of the brain, the mammal brain. Mammalian system, you might have heard it called. And this is actually all about bonding, emotions. The difference between mammals and reptiles are, at the most basic, mammals bond and they suckle on their mothers. So it is about that emotional connection. Where this starts to get relevant in selling is this is where most of our emotions reside. Right in the middle of this mammal central brain is something called the limbic system. And this is the seat of our emotions. It's actually, when you're feeling all hot and bothered or even passionate about something, it's the biggest blood supply in the human body. I'll come back to this. Then overlaying this is something called the cortex. And the most important part of the cortex in terms of human beings is the prefrontal cortex. This is the bit that makes us uniquely human. It's the bit that allows us to make decisions, to think forward, to anticipate. And people tend to distinguish between this mammal system and this overlay of the prefrontal cortex as being the rational brain and the emotional brain. Now, that's where I think it gets really interesting in selling. There's all sorts of other complexity involved, like you've got your right and left hemispheres and other stuff, but I'm breaking it down to be simple. So I think in selling sometimes gets a bad rap, doesn't it? You know, selling as a word, people have, with some people, they have a frame of reference around selling that stops them, and it's all about fear.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Absolutely, it's all around fear. Yeah, it's
rejection.
Exactly, that's the reaction. And with some people, with this emotional brain, when the fear, all of the responses at an unconscious level are happening in the emotional brain, sometimes that fear is so much, Carole, that people don't want to get started. Now, what we know from neuroscience research is the fear is predominantly around rejection. We may not be able to put a voice to it, but what rejection does, it actually creates in the body the same response as pain. The brain wants to keep us safe. The brain is a survival machine. And so what we want to do is we want to move away from pain. So here comes that familiar thing. I'm sure we've all heard the language of the stress response, the fight, flight or freeze response. So we will fight against selling, maybe, or we'll run away from it, or we'll just freeze and we'll avoid it. That's a very natural response. So how do we get over it? No, I think I think knowing a little bit about neuroscience can be really helpful for people.
Yes,
when they understand that this rejection, when they can put a voice to it, this fear response is a natural response, it can actually be really freeing. And the difference between them and people like yourself, who's a super sales strategist, is that you've learned,
myself that.
Well, you've learned strategies over the years to be able to overcome that fear and maybe even use it to fuel you. You may not experience it anymore. Your experience of that emotion is now different. So when we can understand that just by taking a few small steps, one at a time, and celebrating success, that can be really freeing for us. So just to go back, emotional, rational brain, and in some situations, that emotional brain will win out. It is the boss.
Thank you, Gill. So, I mean, neuroscience is very much coming into selling. Well, it has been around for a while.
It has,
it's coming more and more to the forefront. So can you just explain for our audience how neuroscience applies to the world of sales?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you've hit the nail on the head. It's coming more to the forefront. There are even modules at university courses and biobehavior around neuromarketing, neuroselling, which is fantastic. And what has happened, obviously for years and years, psychologists have given us loads of information around human behavior. What's happened over the last, I guess, 15 to 20 years with the advent of technology and scanning techniques is that we've been able to open up more science-based, evidence-based understanding about what's happening at a physiological level when you're selling, when you're interacting in any guise with human beings. That's shone an ever-increasing light into human behavior, more over and above the clinical fields, which I think is really exciting for anybody involved in the world, well, actually with anything to do with human interaction. So when we look at selling, we now have research that is available to us to talk to us about how we can understand our customers better, what might be going on in their brain, as well as what might be going on in our brain when we're involved in an interaction. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, good. So, so we've heard about neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain. So, you know, I've always talked a lot to my clients since I started my business around, you know, how the brain will stop you. It uses the same neural pathways as pain, and that stops you from progressing with a sale. If you think that there are cues that are going to say this person isn't interested. But of course, we've got all those chemicals going around in our brain, like dopamine, endorphins, and cortisol, and all of that really good stuff. So I just wondered if you could explain to our listeners what they are and the part they play in the brain and why they are important to selling.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to say is that neurotransmitters actually are there to transmit energy around the neural system. That's what they are. They're a transport mechanism. They're chemicals and electrical messengers that help information, data, and all sorts of physiological stuff move around the brain and, importantly, the nervous system. So you might sometimes read about the difference between, or you might confuse neurotransmitters with hormones. The only difference is a hormone is when a neurotransmitter is actually working in the body, in cells in the body, as well as in the brain. So I think you mentioned a few there. Endorphins are pain relievers. So what they do is they act on opiate receptors in the brain. So not really specifically related to sales. I think the ones that we can highlight that would be interesting to understand about sales, and we can do something consciously about them, are dopamine particularly, and serotonin.
Right.
So cortisol, you mentioned that before. I'll
Yeah.
just cover that one off as well. That is around the fight and flight response. What cortisol does is it readies your body for the fight and flight response. It also plays a big role in digestion and blood sugar, but it gets that stress response ready. The big surge of cortisol will go around your body if you're feeling under threat in some way, and then it balances. You experience problems if it doesn't balance down, if you're in chronic stress. So the neurotransmitter of dopamine, people talk about dopamine an awful lot. Let's give ourselves a dopamine hit. It's going to be the happy neurotransmitter. I actually like to call it the motivation neurotransmitter. So super relevant in sales. So dopamine is released when we experience a reward, something that is rewarding in our brain. So when you and I, in common parlance, think of the word rewarding, we might be thinking, yay, that's about having a cup of coffee with a friend. Wouldn't that be rewarding these days, especially inside?
Yeah, exactly.
Or we're going to be able to go and have a lovely holiday. So the brain, absolutely, those are rewarding. But for the brain, also being rewarding are things like keeping yourself in your predictable, safe patterns. They will view that as a reward. But when you do something that you find rewarding, you're going to want to do it again. And when you do something again and get the same reward, and you want to do it again and again and again. So dopamine can give you that motivation and that drive. That's why I call it the motivation neurotransmitter. Serotonin is around mood. Now, when we're selling, we want to be in a good mood. It really helps if we can be upbeat. We know that it comes across to clients if we're not in that upbeat, good mood, and it's infectious as well. So we want our clients to be able to sense that. So serotonin is about mood. Natural ways of getting serotonin and putting yourself in a good mood. It's really simple, Carole. Get outside into the sunshine. Serotonin is largely associated with exercise. Walking, just getting outside and walking is fantastic. So always, and I know you're an advocate of this as well, if you're selling, you're having a really great day, or it's just a bit tougher today, go give yourself a break. And the best way you can give yourself a break is to get outside. Also, I think light boxes help as well. People talk about that. I've never had a personal experience of that, but I know that in the long dark winters, so maybe our Scandinavian sales counterparts, really great benefits from those. The other one you mentioned, I think, was oxytocin. So that's called the love hormone, the cuddle neurotransmitter. That's about empathy and bonding. That's released very strongly when women have babies. Very, very strongly there. So maybe not related directly to relationships with your clients because it's quite an intimate thing, but I think you can apply some techniques to release some oxytocin when you give yourself some self-care. I think that I read a beautiful article at the beginning of the pandemic that, of course, we were all missing the hugs, and you can really give yourself a hug with a beautiful soft blanket, and you are releasing, you're helping to bring on the oxytocin. So if you're feeling a bit down in some way, and of course you're wanting to get into that upbeat mood about selling, give yourself a hug, give yourself some self-care.
Can I just interject,
Of course.
Gill? On two things, right? So let me hope that I remember them. The first one is you mentioned about patterns. And what that immediately made me think of are athletes, especially footballers. You hear this a lot where they have a certain pattern or routine that they go through in order to get themselves ready for a match.
Yes.
And I always remember like people coming out, I don't know if it was Ian Wright or somebody like that, would never put their shirt on, their football shirt on, until they actually walked out into the pitch. So as they were walking out, they'd put it on, and that was part of his routine.
Yes.
And you were saying that patterns are really important in not making us go down that fear route, which is one of the reasons why people don't sell, is because they get that fear of rejection coming through. So therefore, would you advise that for a lot of business owners, I mean, I'm not talking about salespeople who are doing this day in, day out, but for business owners, especially solopreneurs, to actually create some form of patterns before they go in to have a sales conversation?
Yeah, I think it can be really, really useful. So that I would actually call that priming. So what we're doing is we're setting ourselves a trigger. Over there in the corner, I've actually got my Brave doll from the movie Brave. Don't want to leave my seat otherwise. Yeah, it's a lovely orange-haired doll.
Yeah. It's
from the movie Brave. And what you've talked about there, absolutely.
Also, I mean, she's Scottish, isn't she?
Well, she is even better.
You're Scottish.
Absolutely, it relates totally to me. So what we're really doing there is, if you think about habits, and so not talking necessarily about the people, as you say, who've got a really successful selling habits that they don't even think about it. Habits are broken up into those triggers, the Ian Wright trigger, of his shirt, then your behavior that I'm going to sell for 2 hours a day, and then the reward, so the dopamine piece that we talked a little bit about before. You can prime yourself and trigger yourself, just like Ian Wright, with something that will remind you that I'm going to go into this exciting 2 hours of selling, to enter it with a very positive frame. So as I mentioned, I've got my Brave doll. Rafa Nadal bounces the ball 14 times.
Exactly.
Whatever it is. Yes, and so patterns can work for you. Yes, and also patterns in the brain are laid down to automate things. So we cognitively, we want to conserve energy all of the time. And so we automate things, and in order to save cognitive energy, so that we can focus on the thing that we're focusing on at the time, because there's far too much streaming into our brain every moment to consciously think of everything in a single moment. If you get out of bed in the morning and you are, which of course we all do, and we have, and we go to the bathroom to brush our teeth, I don't know about you, Carole, but unless I've got toothache, I do not think about, am I going to brush a molar this morning or an incisor? We don't. I've got an automated pattern for my teeth. And even if I was staying in a different hotel with a different bathroom, I still have an automated pattern for my teeth. So you can sometimes set up positive patterns that prime you into a really good habit.
And of course, something like with your teeth, as just staying with that as an example, we're doing that every day, and we've been doing that for years.
Exactly.
Whereas when it comes to selling, you might not be selling every day, although I would advise everyone does sell every day, but you might not be selling every day. And it is then about consciously remembering to take yourself through that pattern. One of the things I always tell my clients is to think about their favorite superhero, and I get them to act it out, because what happens is when we start acting out our superhero, especially if I've got a group of my clients, they start to feel very self-conscious and they start laughing. And of course, what happens is you start to feel really good. And once that level of vibration is raised, then you can have a much better sales conversation. So for my clients, I'm always recommending that they think about their superhero and they get into the superhero pose, which only takes a few minutes. And if they're in there, just sort of like thinking, what does this feel like to be Wonder Woman? We've seen those great films recently, a lot of, and if you've also done it in front of other people, you'll remember laughing about it, and it just lifts you up and you feel much better. So the second, excuse me, so I've got some frogs in my throat this morning. The second thing, just building on from that I wanted to mention is, you said it was it Oxytocin, or the one that women get when they're pregnant?
Yeah, that's the Oxytocin. That's right. Yeah, and it's actually particularly when the baby's born and they've birthed the baby and they're bonding. Yeah.
So what I would just like to really challenge around this, when I mean, many years ago, about over 25 years ago now, I worked for a company that pioneered executive coaching in the UK. And I always remember speaking to one of the founders saying, how come you get these people to spend so much money with you? Because back then it was like £25,000 for 6 months for one meeting. And it literally was a meeting for an hour. It wasn't 90 minutes,
wow.
2 hours. And that was way back then. And and the founder said to me, Carole, he said, I just love my clients. And actually, he was really probably acting as their, in a way, they saw him as their father, a father figure or a grandfather figure. And when you said, you know, like, we just want sort of like a metaphoric hug, you know, we just,
yeah.
But I think that the relationship between the client and your service provider, whether that's a coach, a consultant, or whoever, there is a form of love, not in the way that we think it, with the way that you're in an intimate relationship with somebody, or the way that you love your children, but excuse me, sorry everyone, but the fact is you can form bonds with your clients,
yes,
especially if you're a coach. You can care about them, and you want to see them to do well, and you want to see them be successful. And although you may challenge them around their thinking, you can care about them, you know, and that is a form of love on a, but it's on a very different level. But
yes.
if you just think about, we've really got two emotions, I mean, it's very simplistic, love and fear, then really caring about your client, really wanting to see them do well, really being their cheerleader for them in their corner, but also challenging them when you need to, is a form of love in a way. And if you can build that relationship, then probably maybe, and maybe you can tell me, Jill, and you might say, no, that just doesn't happen, Carole, but maybe then that I was going to say endorphin transmitter is released. What do you think about that?
I actually don't know. And I think what we should do is we should find a university to study it. I think it is really, I wholeheartedly agree with you that when relationships, because we are our clients' cheerleaders, aren't we? Particularly in the coaching and consulting, the broader consulting profession. I mean, I would suggest, and this is not a pure answer, I don't know, note my words, I would suggest that it's more around personally that reward dopamine, that, oh, you know, success is happening, but clearly there is a bond, a relationship, you call it what you will, a friendship, but that cheerleading role and an attachment and a connection, clearly there is. Whether oxytocin is released, I actually don't know in that context. Mostly it is within an intimate relationship. I really do agree with you about the importance of, I think it's a big word, isn't it? Love. That your actions come from a place of love, and also with when you're in a very connected relationship with the client, then you know, we can interpret that as love. I completely agree with you.
And I think that's a really good way to say it. It's a connected relationship with a client.
Yes.
And it's really funny because I was working with my board for Elite Networking, which I know you're part of, Jill. And the subject of love came up. And it's really, I don't have a problem with talking about it, only because, you know, way back when I was working with the coaches, that was on the table. And of course, it was a very challenging time in this environment that I was working in. But so I just see that as being very normal, understanding that there are different types of love.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
But still today, people have problems or challenges around saying, yes, this is a form of love.
Yes,
so they are a client, but I really like them. I really get on well with them. I enjoy meeting them and having conversation with them. But I think you put that beautifully, Jill. It's when you're in a very connected relationship with a client, and I think that describes it beautifully.
Oh, thank you so much. I think what you open up there, Carole, which is so interesting, is our interpretation around language. You know, we all live in our own reality, don't we? Language is really interesting. back to selling, back to your first question where I talked about fear and rejection, some people will hear the word sales and say, can't wait to get there and get into my first job as a salesperson.
Yes,
because of their frames. Yeah, exactly. Because of their frame of reference. So there's a dictionary definition and then there's a lived definition. Yeah. And we have our frames of reference around that. And what we do is we all at a subconscious level operate to what I call confirmation bias. We all seek to confirm with any narrative we run through our head, any script that we're running through our head, we look for evidence to support that. So you will most likely be looking for that connected relationship, that relationship that has love in some form of definition, because you're steeped in selling and you'll have years and years of experience of selling in connected relationships. People who are beginning selling, who might have a different frame around selling, won't necessarily see that it's possible to have that connect. It would be kind of distance from them. It's not near enough to them to see that that's a possibility.
Hi, Gill. Sorry.
I think we froze for a little minute.
Yeah, my internet, everyone, is playing up today. I was talking to Gill about it. I was thinking, please. And I was only thinking we're going so well. And then I could see that Gill had frozen. But luckily on my phone, which I've got at the side, I could quickly look and see that you were still talking, Gill. So were you able to finish that?
Yes, I was. I think I finished off by saying, oops, you've frozen. Yeah, it was about... It was about language. Yeah.
Okay, so going on, I know we've got some people joining us. So just to say to everyone who's joining us, hello, thank you so much. We've got people joining us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. So Gill, my next question is, can you sort of like talk a bit about the conscious and the subconscious mind, how it works and how it relates to selling for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is so much that goes on at a subconscious level that affects the way that we operate, that affects the way that we show up in the world. And actually, I know that you work a lot with coaches. You know, one of the roles of coaches, or one of the benefits of working with a coach, let's put it that way, is to help you understand perhaps those subconscious scripts, those subconscious mantras that are going on that might not be serving you well. What's actually, you know, running your brain, what's going on in your brain that makes you not be as successful as you can be. So in selling, I really think that it's important that we are talking to our clients' subconscious, to their emotions, as well as their conscious brain. So let's just pull out, and being really simplistic, going back to what I said at the beginning, the rational and the emotional. I think it's really important that we make our pitch, our conversations, call it what you will, really appealing to our clients, so that we appeal to their values, we appeal to, not overtly, that we wouldn't say a sentence saying, I'm now going to talk to your values, but that we build that know, like, trust, that's the popular 3-word mantra, by appealing to what's going on beneath, so that we make things exciting, relatable, that useful, practical, so that they connect, not just at a logical, conscious level, but they connect with your message at more of a visceral, instinctual, matching level. And then there's something in them that makes them feel, I'm interested, I'm intrigued. And then their thought processes may become more conscious, and they start to think, okay, how much is Carole's program? Do I want to work with her? What are the details that sit around it? So I think it's really important that we evoke a sense of feeling. We talk to all of the senses. So we're almost taking our clients through a sensory experience, a mental rehearsal, if you like, which is what we do when we visualize, that we're almost helping our clients to go on a visualization experience of what's it going to be like to work with this coach, this consultant.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gill. That's great. Because I know it's something that people definitely want to know. Now, one of the things that's really, really important in selling is about asking smart questions.
Mm.
And asking smart questions, I always say, is like the GPS, the sat nav of having better quality sales conversations with your clients. So from a neuroscience perspective, what do you need to do to ask better quality questions? How can neuroscience help people when it comes to neuroselling in that aspect?
Yes, so questions are the sort of mainstay of great salespeople and great coaches as well, and great consultants. So a question has to be. But let me go back. I remember years ago I went on a training program, nothing to do with selling, nothing to do with neuroscience. It was to do with communications, and it was called communications, clarity, brevity, and impact. And those three words have always stuck with me. So I believe that the mainstay of great questions are about clarity, they're about being brief, and they're about what I said before in the previous question, hitting with impact, so hitting into the subconscious mind. And this is all to do with, I think, how much information the brain can actually cope with at one time. Because when you ask a question, what are we asking a question for? We're asking a question so that somebody thinks, so that somebody progresses, so that somebody's able to come up with an idea, that they're able to come up with a response, that they're then able to make potentially a decision around. So you're looking to broaden people out rather than narrow them down with a question. So I think the trick with questions is not to fill people up with anything ambiguous or clever. I think, we have as human beings a propensity to want to say too much, to give an awful lot in our questions and in our answers. But also, I think with questions, the big thing is about listening.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think about questions and answers as like a tennis match. We tend to seek to listen to respond without knowing it, rather than listening to really understand. And so in a sales situation, we know as a buyer, if the person selling us their program or explaining their program, we know if they're not listening to us. We know as human beings in any situation if they're not listening to us. So I think it's really important that we're really truly in the moment when we are asking good questions, and that they are clear, that they are brief, they are unambiguous. That really matters. Do not put the word "and" in a question, because I know this is question 101, but if you put the word "and" in a question, you're confusing somebody else's brain, and they're more likely to answer the second part of the question because of the recency effect. Yeah. That's more likely what they'll grab hold of. So you're filling them up with too much and not allowing them to give the breadth of answer that will help you to respond back. And of course, we know that when you respond back, paraphrasing is really powerful, because what it does is it helps to show the client that you're listening to them, that you've taken their language on board and you're attuning to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those very, as you said, short questions are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And I think it is, look, I've seen an awful lot of coaches get this wrong. And even like mindset coaches who know all of this stuff, but they still end up talking and talking and talking, and the genius of it is when you do the short question, because it is so powerful. And as you said, it gives people that breadth of space, to be able to answer it in full, so that's really, really important. So I want to ask another question. I've got several to ask you.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I see a lot of coaches, well, it's really building on from what we've just spoken about, but I see a lot of coaches and consultants, as I said, talking way too much in a sales situation. And what I've heard is that neuroscience suggests, and maybe this is really just confirming on what you've just said, is that by allowing your prospect to speak, and, as you said, it sort of like gives them the breadth. When you speak, 4 sentences is the maximum that you should be speaking for when you're in that sales situation, having a conversation. And I don't mean, well, it could be going into a big corporate and making a big presentation, but it could also be on a one-to-one level where you're just like a coach who's maybe even a newly qualified coach, but just using 4 sentences,
yes,
and no more. So could you explain just why this is important, or do you agree with that to start off?
But I think it is context dependent, Carole. So I think that presentations are potentially different because don't let me divert. Bring me back if I'm too full. But within a presentation, we all know about the power of storytelling, and of course there may be many more than 4 sentences if you're really bringing somebody into the nitty gritty and the joy of your story. I think in a conversation, this is about working memory. So and it does relate to what I said before. I think the number 4 comes from, there was a psychologist years ago who talked about the magical number 4, and it's all to do with the amount of information that we can hold in mind, everything streaming into our nervous system and what we do with it. When we're asking a question or when we're talking to someone, we're wanting them to do something with it, aren't we? And we're wanting to progress them. We're wanting to be able to move the conversation on in some way, particularly when selling. And it seems to be that 4, and I would almost suggest even less, just purely because of my own experience, but from the working memory perspective, it seems to be that the number 4 is the amount of chunks that we can hold in mind and process and work on at the same time. So there's quite a lot, this Miller's experiments were years ago, there's quite a lot of experiments that have happened since in various universities around this. It seems, and in a way there's no surprise here, that it can change across the lifespan. So maybe as we get older, let's do 2 sentences each.
Let's keep it to 1.
But it also potentially changes with IQ as well. And that kind of makes sense that people process data in different ways. But 4 seems to be that magic number because at its simplest, our brains get full and we'll start to forget what happened at the beginning. So if we're processing and working on the information at the same time, let's split it into 2 elements of the conversation, I think. I would err on the side of less.
So many different ways, because one, I was listening, like all of us, we're avid learners, we're always learning, but and I cannot remember who, but I was listening to somebody, this really great guy, funnily enough, from Clubhouse. And he was saying, our brains work the best actually when we haven't eaten. So his view was always eat small meals.
Right.
And actually, if you can delay having, some of the nutritionists might go crazy, but he was sort of like saying, this fasting that a lot of people do, like the 16-hour fasting, is really good, because when you get up, you're still in that fasting, and actually your brain works so incredibly well, and it's like at its most energetic and gazelle-like, that it can work much faster and quicker, and you can remember things. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And he sort of like went on to say, and something that I have observed in myself, because I do that fasting,
right,
that as soon as you start to eat, it slows you down. And of course it does, because then the body's working on, digesting the food.
Exactly. And there's a big link between the brain and the gut. So, and between the brain, heart, brain, gut, brain, and all of that's a completely other subject. But that's super interesting. So I wonder if, in future selling programs, we talk about be a gazelle, go on your intermittent fasting. Maybe it's a little bit. I can add that in. I think maybe something about that is also about hydration, because I know that people, and it's super successful, this fasting, isn't it? I know that people who do this, that they drink a lot of water. But it frees up, I guess, your brain to be available for cognitive processes rather than bodily processes.
Yes. Exactly. Right. Okay. Let me ask you the next question. So from a neuroscience perspective, what characteristics are common amongst coaches and consultants who sell well?
Right. So coaches and consultants. So let's just go back to their innate characteristics, their innate skills of being good listeners, asking great questions, building rapport with people. Yeah, I think let's hope they're good at that as well. Mm-hmm. So let's remember that we, in those professions, we can actually pull on those and be our own best reference sites. But I think the answer to this is that neuroscience, it gives us so much information, but I think for a coach and a consultant, one of the greatest characteristics is to be able to be flexible to somebody else's style. And I'm not talking about acting or putting on a performance, because we can see that a mile off. If somebody just flips the script completely and becomes a different persona in the moment when they realize that you're different to them, then that's not good. So I think that the greatest clues we can get here when we're with somebody new, perhaps, is to listen to the language that they use and listen to the way that they're taking in information, watch and notice that. And obviously, if you know somebody a little bit longer, it's a bit easier. So very simply, some of us prefer data and numbers. So you can tell people who are using language like, well, that's not logical, or that doesn't stack up. So they're looking for more of an evidence-based approach. Other people talk about possibilities and opportunities and excitement. So they're looking for different language. They're looking for a different explanation around what you're selling. So the characteristics are about being able to attune to different preferences. So neuroscience tells us it's back to these patterns, it's back to conserving cognitive energy. We do lay down strong pathways for preferences for our modus operandi. And I mean, this is a big subject, but our personalities develop from that, our preferences develop from that. So my business partner would say to me, Gill, I haven't heard you use the word logical ever. And I'll say to him, I haven't heard you use the word empathy forever. Is this live streaming really? but it doesn't mean that we can't do everything. Of course we can, but we go to our preferred modus operandi more automatically because it's easier for us and it's less effort, because the neural pathways are stronger there. There's more activity there because we've done it time and time again. So recognizing that in others, I think, is a superpower from neuroscience. And we know even in our friendships that happens naturally. We're able to attune to somebody's mood. We're able to attune to their language to be able to build rapport. But it's not a formula. That subconscious signaling that can't go, we can tell a mile off if somebody is putting on a performance. So I think that's a really important understanding from neuroscience. It's a great characteristic for people from the coaching consulting world or any other world who sell well. They build relationships through that natural rapport building. And it's about attuning, stepping in metaphorically into somebody else's world, using their language and mirroring that back.
Yeah. So that's the thing, that really what we're saying is, from a Neuroselling perspective, that's what makes the difference between a good coach or consultant who's selling to a great coach who's selling.
I love your language there, absolutely, so that they reach that sort of superhero status. But also there's a degree of comfort there. I think that self-awareness matters too, because these preferences will give rise to our strengths. And I think an area for development for all of us is that we can sometimes overuse our strengths, so that we know that we do something naturally, it's easy for us. And when we've got a language around it, I'm strong at that, I'm good at that. But you can be almost too good at something so that it stops your flexibility. So I think, does that make sense? That you've got to apply it to yourself as well. Am I overusing my strength? That can often be a blind spot for even the greatest coach and consultant when they're in a selling or any situation.
Thank you, Gill. So now I'm going to talk about something that I know, I'm going to use the word that I know that you love. So how can reframing negative emotions using neuroplasticity principles help with selling?
Well, yes, the whole reframing.
Let's get that word in that you love.
Yeah, it's funny. Whenever I put a post up on LinkedIn, if ever you're primed in my brain. If ever I write the word reframing, I think, oh, Carole's going to roll her eyes with this. I love this. So it's around negative emotions. You're saying, how can you reframe that negative script?
I remember, sorry, just to interrupt before you start. I remember somebody saying to me once, "Oh, well, you know, the new buzzword is reframe. Jill's always using it." And I was thinking, well, look, it's been around for years.
Yeah, well, I know, of course, absolutely.
But you use it in a really brilliant way.
Oh,
so.
Thank you. You brought that back well. Thank you for that. So you talked about neuroplasticity. This is my favorite topic to talk about, because I actually think that people band around this language without really knowing what it means. And it's actually really simple. We talked a little bit about it already, that neuroplasticity, works on the basis that the brain is plastic, not literally, but like a bit of malleable plastic, it can change shape. So it's the inner workings of the brain that can change shape, the networks. So when you're doing something new and you practice it again, you can rewire. So when you are reframing, and when you're reframing time and time again and practicing it, you can change your script. A negative feeling, a series of negative emotions, so whether it's recurring or even in a one-off, you can bring that to your conscious awareness and work with a coach or with yourself. It is easier, I believe, with a coach or with somebody else to change that script. Now, in the changing of the script, the reframing of the script, you're doing something in your brain. Because with the practice of the changing of that script, that is where your brain is changing. Neurons, I think it was Ruby Wax who she might not have been the first to say it, but she's got quite a lot of stuff out there. She said neurons that fire together, wire together. That's another saying that people say. So negativity and that whole area that may be a spiral into depression, that's a big subject. But the reframing and the flipping the script is what a lot of coaches do. And in doing that with practice, they're helping people to rewire it, literally rewire, by laying down more pathways. Because what's happening, if the pathway gets stronger and you're practicing, you're attracting new neurons to it. If you're attracting new neurons to it, it's more active. If it's more active, it's more accessible to us.
So really, if you want to be a great salesperson, you've got to practice the reframing.
Carole, you've got it. It's that reinforcement of all those posts.
Finally. So why is exploring new ways of doing things important to the brain and subsequently supports the performance around selling, Gill?
Yeah, okay. So again, novelty is really interesting. So when we know from research, when we are in a curious state, think about curiosity. When you're curious, you can almost be quite nosy, can't you? You're wanting to find out things. So when you're in a curious state, the brain really likes novelty. It's really good for the brain because it uses new parts of the brain because you're not in necessarily those familiar patterns. But let's caution that with the brain tries to keep us safe. So we want the predictability can be rewarding. So novelty can be resisted. But when you're in a curious state, that's when your brain will take novelty on board. It's almost as if the curiosity will override the predictability desire. So the reward from the curiosity is higher than that desire to keep us safe. So being a curious state is a really highly effective state for anybody in sales. And of course, when we are taking on novel situations, we're learning. Now, learning is I think it's highly motivational, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. When they're learning, again, they're broadening out. They may not have all of the answers. It might be ambiguous, but that's okay. They're not narrowing down. And again, when we're learning, we're giving ourselves the opportunity for neuroplasticity to come into play and to create new avenues. So what learning does is it gives us the drive, it gives us the motivation, and it opens us up. So when you're I think that's why a lot of people, well, maybe it's not why, but when we talk about discovery calls, that's what we're doing. We're discovering, we're learning. We ourselves, when we're selling, are learning about our client, and we're giving them the opportunity to look at a novel possibility with you. But I think, when you talk about this quite a lot, sometimes that novelty might just be a little bit too much that we're selling. And so this is why it's really important at the beginning of a relationship to give a prospect, a client, many different ways of working with you, so that they can start to engage with you at a small level, so that the novelty of Carole as somebody I've never heard of before, oh, I'm following her on her content, on her posts, that's really interesting. Yes, I'll download her freebie. Really liking this. I'll go onto her YouTube channel. I know how she speaks, and then I'll have the conversation. So the novelty can build. Sometimes in the selling situation, well, not even sometimes, probably not a good idea to go straight to the big signature program sale, because the curiosity may be there, but the novelty, the safety of keeping in that predictability, novelty is interesting, but I'm not going to part with my cash for that, not that yet, because I don't yet know you well.
I mean, the great Diane Sawyer always said, get curious, and that's really, really important. And I think that's what happens when we have, when we give our clients, and I'm talking specifically around coaches who are like solo coaches, like you and me, Gill, we work on our own, and we do a number of things, but it's really important that we have a number of ways in which clients can work with us. Because they get curious, but they don't want to make that big investment straight away.
Absolutely.
So they work with you in a smaller way. And what's happening is it's reaffirming to them that, yes, they like you. Yes, you're giving them great value. Yes, they trust you. And then they then start to step up. Now, I've seen clients go from buying a £27 program to stepping into a mastermind for 16,000. So they can make that leap if they've learned something in the Oh, are we back, Gill? Great.
Yeah, we're back now. Hello again.
Hello, everyone.
Question one.
Let's just hope it's still going. Yeah, I can look down on my phone and I can see it's still going. Yeah, let's start again. So where did I get to, Gill?
You were talking about you've seen people to make the leap from that 27 to the big mastermind.
To the big number.
So it can happen.
That can definitely happen. And it all depends, I think, on, like, I'm going to call it markers. That may not be the right terminology to use in Neuroselling perspective. But I think that I've seen it where people say, okay, there are a number of things that I'm identifying with you. So there are certain things that you have said that I've already got ticked in the box. And I've just come into this small program just to see, just to confirm. And that's it. Now I'm going to step in and work with you in a much bigger way. For other people, it will be a much slower journey. Okay, this was good. I got great value. Maybe I'll do another one that you come out with. And okay, that's a little bit more money. Okay, I'm prepared to pay that. And for some people, that can be a 2-year journey. Before they step into working with you at a much deeper level. Or a much more invested, where they've heavily invested.
Absolutely.
Whereas, and so for some people, that is that journey. And for others, they will come in at that ground level and they'll never move from that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many things at play there, aren't there? I mean, I think the thing is, we can never know, ever, no matter how brilliant at planning we are, how much experience we have in multiple markets, we can never know what people's personal situation is or what their triggers are. You know, what's going to pull them back into risk aversion, and maybe that's their modus operandi, or what their perception of money is, or perception of value. It's we can. I'm not talking about, we shouldn't talk generically. We should always talk individually to our clients, but we can never really know what is triggering them into a decision. We can help them by offering all the answers and lots of different avenues for touch points for working with us. And we can build all that know, like, and trust. But at the end of the day, one of my favorite sayings, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors, do we?
Yeah. So Gill, the next question I want to ask, although I know that you've really answered this as we've gone through this talk, but I still think it's good to bring out, as you've sort of we've touched on, our brains are pattern making organs.
Yeah.
So if potential clients are triggered into a threat state, they will likely walk away from a sale. So can you just explain why this is? Why, when they're triggered into that threat state,
yes,
they're far more likely to walk away from a sale?
Yeah, well, I think I might have just almost said it before. We don't know about those triggers, and we don't know where it comes from, but it's back to the emotional and the rational brain. In that situation, Carole, the emotional brain's boss, that fear comes back, and it is now boss again. It's just saying, no, don't go with this. And that may, later on, they may regret it. They may be reticent about that decision, but in the moment, and cortisol will come into play here as well, because they'll be beginning to experience some sort of fight or freeze, or not yet, but they'll push back because the emotional reaction to whatever it might be is so strong that they're prepared to walk away, no matter what their logical brain is saying about, but you said you were going to do a mastermind this year, or this price is really fantastic. Even when we're appealing to that scarcity piece, that fear of missing out, which is another emotional piece when we're selling, say, it's only on offer for February or March, but the fear or that's something that's triggered them is so strong, and who knows, it could be wired way back into childhood, for instance, that it's not the rational brain will not win out. That will happen in certain situations.
Thank you, Gill. So look, I'm going to wrap it up because I've just looked at the time and we've probably been on for about an hour.
No.
And what I'd like to do, Gill, is to take this conversation on to Clubhouse as well. So maybe we can arrange a Clubhouse, because we know that we've got different audiences, and at the moment we can't bring them on live as well. So it'd be really good to have this conversation. But if we've got to the end now, what, from your perspective, what's the one thing that you would like people to take away from this conversation this morning?
So for me, I believe that we are all in the business of neuroplasticity. So if ever you get stuck, just remember that you can change your brain. That's my message.
Now, Gill, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Carole.
Firstly, just before we wrap up, you do have a book called Stuck.
Have
you got it? Normally you have it behind you.
I do. Yes, it's here. Let me grab a copy.
Grab a copy so you can show everyone.
Yes. That was really well rehearsed, wasn't it? Yeah, here is my book. Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously you can get it through Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's also on Kindle as well, isn't it? So show it up again.
Yeah, I will do. It is. And also, if anybody wants, if they are interested and you want to buy it directly from me, the Scottish girl is saying it's cheaper directly from me. It's £12. But I give £2 of every purchase to Brain Research UK, who are they're a lovely small charity. And I've partnered with them on my book, and we'll do another project again in the future.
Lovely. That's really lovely. So, Gill, just tell everyone where they can get a hold of you. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Best way for me is LinkedIn. It's absolutely my preferred platform. And if you DM me there, then I can give you all my other contact details as well. That'd be great. That's
that great phrase. So if you have an Apple phone, if you're on the iOS platform, you can be in Clubhouse, and everyone is saying, DM me.
Oh, are they? I'm not up with the lingo.
A lot of people are saying, slide into my DMs, right?
I'm going to use that. Thank you.
No, I don't use it. I just say DM me. But, that's that part of that new language that's coming in and makes us stay relevant when we start to do that. So I just like to thank everyone for for being with us. I can see that we've got people on, well, Facebook anyway. I'm not looking at it because I don't want to pick up my phone and for us to dip out again with my internet. But thank you very much, Gill, for your time. I hope everyone has really enjoyed this conversation. Please do come along and connect with both Gill and I. Of course, we're on LinkedIn. Please come along and have a look at my YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell so that every time I upload a new video, you get a copy of it. And of course, we're on Facebook and also Clubhouse as well. So thank you, everyone. And we will see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you, Carole.